everybody, my name is Melissa Renteria. I am refuting a claim by Kessie that stated kneeling during the national anthem has been an effective form of protest. Her secondary claims were that kneeling during the national anthem has brought major attention to the matter of police brutality, that kneeling has garnered support as time goes on, and that kneeling during the national anthem is peaceful and doesn't inspire violence. So she begins by giving background information. She uses Colin Kaepernick in his 2016 season, how he began to take a knee during the national anthem before a game. His reasons that she stated was that it brings awareness to police brutality and their insufficient training. So she stated that it was in an interview that Kaepernick gave on YouTube, that there was only 880 to 980 hours on average for police training. There was no source, even if she didn't provide the source. Kaepernick in his interview didn't provide the source, so I can kind of just deem this as not credible. I did find that an article in the Houston Chronicle, which is the largest daily newspaper in Houston, said that even if police departments require only a certain amount of hours of training to graduate, just because they get the badge doesn't mean that the training is over. The quote from the article says, most police departments pair newly minted officers with more experienced partners to continue their on-the-job training. So for example, San Diego Police Department requires an additional 4 months of training alongside a field training officer post-graduation. Memphis PD requires an additional 1 year, and Philadelphia PD requires, they have a 30-week training academy, and then once they graduate, they have 18 months of on-the-job probation. In this same interview, Kaepernick also stated that somebody holding a curling iron has more education and training than the people who have a gun and are going out to the streets to protect us. So, I mean, I think it's a little bit broad to make the claim that just because cosmetologists train for more hours that, they're maybe more qualified to hold a gun. I think that's kind of, you can't really make that correlation. And I'm sure that if he ever had to call 911, we'd probably call them before he called his local salon to get their backup. So in response to her first secondary claim that kneeling during the anthem has brought major attention to the matter of police brutality, Kessie supports this by saying that people are now talking about it and that it affects us all. So she just mentions Trayvon Martin, Eric Garner, Sandra Bland, and Philando Castile. There's no problem using these cases as an example of police brutality. However, she just assumed that the audience knows or remembers the cases. Personally, for me, I only knew about one of them, and that was Trayvon Martin. And so, without expanding on them and without giving enough information, the evidence, in my opinion, was just dismissed. She continued to discuss the Daniel Shaver case, the pest control guy from Arizona. I personally had never heard of it. So the problem here is that it's unclear in the presentation, and she did not give adequate information, so I would just dismiss it as well, because without showing actual police brutality, rather than just, mentioning just a little bit about it, I thought it was just a little bit irrelevant. And her third final point for her first secondary claim is that some people may be aware of the problem, but she's remained silent, and that's all she addressed about it. So, it was kind of just an open claim. There was no information or reference to anything about it. So I personally just took it as, what can I do about it? I'm just one person. My voice doesn't really, make a difference. So she kind of just left it open. Her secondary claim was that kneeling has garnered support as time goes on. She supported this by saying it's been covered on various news platforms, supported by military personnel, government officials, and politicians. She provided a quote from the Washington Post that provided a statistic that states there's no fluctuation in police brutality from 2016 to 2017. So that would be basically, the year following Kaepernick's protest. So if nothing has changed with police brutality, it hasn't dropped at all, it just raises a question about the effectiveness of his protest. So then she did mention that there's no fluctuation in the rate of police brutality, but that officers are getting punished for it. But even if they're getting punished, it's still happening. Nothing's changing. And then her last secondary claim 3 was that kneeling during the national anthem is peaceful and does not inspire violence. She states that extreme protests do not tend to persuade others. She gives the example of Charlottesville, North Carolina protest, which I found a report in Al Jazeera said that this was described as one of the largest white supremacist events in recent U.S. history. So knowing this, I'm not too sure if a white supremacist rally could ever really be peaceful. It's such a controversial and extreme topic that I'm unsure if that reasoning is fair to just a peaceful protest like kneeling with basically a riot about a very controversial issue. She also states that nonviolent protests are more likely to be heard. She says it promotes conversation, builds bridges, and promotes acceptance and camaraderie. I've done research and found that refusing to stand for the national anthem angers many and sows division in our country. There's a website called procon.org. It's a site dedicated to helping people understand issues so they could better understand each other. And this website states that Kaepernick and others who have refused to stand for the anthem have caused division among their teams, their fans, and across the country. Santa Clara Police Union, who protects or who does security for the games, saw Kaepernick wearing socks with pigs and police uniforms in an interview, and they threatened to withdraw their security at the games. Fellow football player Drew Brees, quarterback of the New Orleans Saints, supports Kaepernick's message, however he disagrees with the delivery. Brees states, "It's an oxymoron that you're sitting down, disrespecting the flag that has given you the freedom to speak out." So in conclusion, Kezi's main claim that kneeling for the national anthem has been an effective form of protest. However, with insufficient evidence, flaws in her reasoning, and opposing counterclaims, of conducting that kneeling for the national anthem is not an effective form of protest. Thank you.
Okay, you need to project a little bit more at the beginning of the speech so we actually know that you're beginning. I think you're being kind of passive in your presentation, so you don't have to yell and scream, but a little bit more force I think would probably help. Pacing maybe also would help. You do go over time for more than a minute, and that's a little bit of a problem. I like the fact that you listed the claims and the secondary issues quickly. You have a summary of the context of the advocate's argument, but you need to get through all of that a little bit faster. It takes you almost 2 minutes to get to the first of the supporting claims, and so that's a lot of time that goes by just kind of summarizing and reminding us everything that was being talked about originally. The challenge on the first piece of evidence that Kaepernick made about the number of hours, I thought that that was easily the place where you had the most consistent evidence and spent the most amount of time. You suggested that the comparison's probably not a legitimate one that's being made at the end. I thought there was kind of a humorous way that you're addressing that issue to the cosmetologist. And then you also pointed out that the training doesn't end simply with the 30 weeks of training that they do in an academy, but it continues for a period of time after that, which has probably not been accounted for. One of the other things that might be interesting to note and this would have required additional time and energy into the research, was how much time any of the people who had been on the jobs or how much time people who had been involved in any of these police brutality situations or circumstances had been on the jobs. If they were in their first year, then you might say it's a lack of training, but if they're in their 5th, 10th, 15th year, they've had plenty of opportunities to do training, and I think that that might change the way in which that argument is going to be perceived. When you get to the argument about the particular examples that are being cited, the way you kind of treat it is because she didn't cite a particular source for the examples and that you were unfamiliar with them, that they're therefore not something that you're going to consider. I think that might be a little bit problematic. The Trayvon Martin case, for instance, I think that would be a good one for you to start with, since that's the one that you did recognize, and you might want to point out that Trayvon Martin's death did not come at the hands of a police officer, but somebody who is not a police officer, and so this is an equivocation that seems to be a little bit problematic here. There might be other issues related to the way that young black men have been treated, but this is certainly not a police issue in this particular case. This is a civilian that caused this particular death. There might be a criticism of the courts, but I don't think, since the advocate presented an argument about the courts and was focusing primarily on the brutality issue and the way the police are inadequately trained, that this really doesn't fit the argument. So as an example, it doesn't really support the generalization. And some of the other cases might be problematic as well, but you never go into any depth on them. You basically dismiss them because the advocate didn't cite more specific information about each of them. The support for the kneeling, and whether or not it's effective, I do think that you need to have a stronger argument about what the criteria is for effectiveness here. I like the general response that you mentioned that says, look, there hasn't been any change in the numbers of police brutality, although I'm not sure if it sounded like you were citing the advocate's information on this particular point, and that I think would probably help undermine the argument a little bit more. If you had additional information since the evidence that the advocates cited, that would also help. But I do think that's a good generic challenge. But the real question is, are people seeing this as a endemic and inherent problem, or are they seeing it in the same piecemeal way that they have always seen these sorts of incidents? And I think that was the general point of Kaepernick's protest from the beginning, was that we need to look at this in a more holistic way. And the question then becomes, have we changed the way that we perceive that? You also have a good challenge to the analogy that the advocate uses about peaceful demonstration, and you can understand why this example of the extreme demonstration doesn't really seem comparable. I can kind of see your point there. The question about whether it's counterproductive, I do think that that is also a good argument to be presenting on this third point, and that, in addition to the point that you made about the number of hours of training, that I thought was the second of your arguments that was most effectively developed and provided some good counter evidence. All right, thank you.